This is chapter 12. It is an extremely well-written chapter and it has a lot of information. We do not need to go so deep. When I say the things we will cover, I'm referring to the things that I know will be on your final exam. We need to cover structures, unit cells, close packing of spheres, and what kind of bonding there is in each of these different sorts of solids. So to get started, I saw this in October, on October 14th, and it'll make more sense once we finish the chapter. So there's a topic called superconductivity, and this was written about in Nature where it was a mystery material, that it could conduct electricity at temperatures up to 15 degrees centigrade. Now, normally you have to have liquid nitrogen temperatures, or even colder is the best way to put it. But there is a catch. It only works at extremely high pressures, and you would only find those at the center of the Earth. So while it is an interesting insight, it is not something that's very practical. So let's talk about now what we do know, okay? I'm really not going to be able to go into polymers. I find them extremely interesting. As you know from recycling, they all have little numbers on them and says, what can you do with them? As we leave Gen Chem, there's another thing I have to say. Even though a polymer is a solid, we will talk about things being crystalline. We will talk about things being amorphous. Polymers can be both. And by crystalline, we mean it has an ordered region. And that's kind of how a scientist would draw it pictorially. We can also see polymers are going to be very ordered, or they could be very disordered. They could have these things called crosslinks. Again, this will not be on your exam, but I feel as a professional, I need to mention it. Next slide shows a little bit that I always like to talk about, food polymers, okay? My love is food, not eating so much, but just preparing and understanding. When you think about gluten in bread, it's what gives rise to this beautiful architecture here. And my son and I, we have a running competition. Who can make a better looking and better tasting bread? So we talked about intermolecular forces in the last chapter. And what happens is if you have a chain that is like a gluten, what will happen is if you must add salt to your recipe, what the salt will do is it will make the chains push themselves apart, leading to the beautiful architecture that you have in bread. You can also have crosslinks. Like when we do strudel, I took a course called, it was about food chemistry from MIT. It was an online. And as a chemist, I found it fascinating. I just have to throw that out there. So what's happening in our class? We're almost there. When you think about what's in your car, all right, you think, well, they're made of metal. Well, they sort of used to be made of metal. Now there are a lot of plastics involved. Yes, there is steel, which is an alloy. Yes, there is stainless steel, which does not rust, but there's also things like elastomers that are polymers. There's platinum in your catalytic converter. There's all kinds of ionic solids. There's aluminum alloys, and now there's also silicon semiconductors that control our car. All of these are solids, and that's what makes me excited about chemistry. So what's going to happen in this chapter? We're going to tell you about how do you classify a solid. We're going to have something that's called a metal. I don't think that needs to be explained. That'd be something like copper, iron. There'll be something like ionic that you've heard a heck of a lot about in this class. Those would be things like sodium chloride or magnesium oxide. Something you haven't heard too much about are covalent network solids, and they're very important in the real world, as well as molecular solids. That would be something like water. So, in terms of an introduction, keep it in perspective. What I'm going to say that follows is what will be on your final exam. Is there more? Yes. To me, is it interesting? Oh, most definitely yes. But I know you have just a limited amount that you need to know.